next presentation is preparing for the legislature, funding Respite. And we have Jeffrey Klein, who is president and CEO of Nevada Senior Services, who is going to be presenting.
One of the things I always like to point out about advocacy, particularly at the state level, but it applies at the local level and the federal level as well, is it's not about politics, it's about policy. It's not about party, because our party are vulnerable people who need services, who need our help, their family caregivers, and those who work with us to help support them. And so if a legislator is supportive of that perspective, then we're all part of the same party. But if they're not, there's somebody to be won over and to join us in the policy activity. And all of that's been kind of compromised and made more difficult by COVID-19 and its impact on our most vulnerable. We have this perfect storm going on. Our population is aging very rapidly. We have COVID-19, and the COVID-19 has had the impact of hyper-straining our state budget resources. Our populations tend to be more disabled, more functionally impaired, and they really represent about 95% of the total Medicare dollars when you look at people with chronic conditions, which means people with are living longer but having greater problems. And that necessitates more supports, more respite, and higher quality supportive care. So we have in the workforce, until COVID happened, we had this increasing demand, but in a constricting supply of personnel. We still have a constricted supply of personnel because of COVID, despite the fact that unemployment is on a roller coaster ride. And our personnel who deliver these services are not well compensated. And a lot of the direct care is funded by government programs that frankly just don't pay enough dollars. So the dichotomy is we want safety for those we love. We want autonomy for them and for ourselves. And respite services are often at the critical balance of this equation. So it creates a conundrum for us. And no matter how great and destructive problems may seem now, look out, Charlie, you've probably only seen the tip of them. And so with COVID and our aging population and increasing levels of disability, the pressure cooker that is this problem just gets greater, and the impact that it has on state government and our resources gets greater. And as I think we've all seen from dysfunction in government, if you think the problems we have are bad now, just wait until you see government solutions to them. So how do we become effective advocates in this very complicated landscape? Well, first, let's take a step back for just a second and just look at how important respite is within the context of everything else that goes on. So this little Venn diagram, for those of you who like these things, basically illustrates that community supports, healthcare services, and community-based services, which are the pods a lot of us tend to think about, all overlap. And at the confluence of all that overlap is respite. So whether or not you frame it from a disability perspective with a child or a disabled adult or an aging senior, whether it's driven by healthcare concerns or a need for community-based services or part of community supports that sometimes even come out of our faith-based communities, it all comes together and we are all in this together. Health, quality of life, and value of care in our Nevada community is really critical and is much driven by our ability to support people, to give them a break in the action, to allow them to go to work, to allow them to de-stress. And in the end, it's not the years in your life that count, it's the life in your years. And respite is really at the core of that. People who are fried constantly from their caregiving responsibilities, frankly, just don't have much life in their years. So it brings us to advocacy. And the notion of advocacy coming from the Latin means to summon and to call to one's aid. And I think very much when we think of our state legislature, that's really what we're doing. This is our call to action for our legislators to help address the public policy issues that confront us. So a Roman era rabbinic scholar had a series of famous calls. And the first line is, if I am not for myself, who is for me? And so how do we answer that dilemma? As we look at respite in our state, it means self-advocacy. How do we prop people up to be effective advocates for themselves? Agency leadership, board, and how do we mobilize our client base? And certain parts of the community are good at pieces of this. Some organizations are really good across the board. But we need to recognize that as leaders, we need to be personally engaged. We have to make that personal commitment. We need to make sure our agencies are making high-level commitments, that our boards are engaged on the policy issues that we have, and that our clients come out. Clients who don't come out to support themselves are a much weaker advocate group. So continuing with Rabbi Hillel, when I'm only for myself, what am I? And this is really a hard issue for many of us in the respite community, but in all communities. How do we make common cause? We have a tendency to look at our own silos and try to advocate inside our silos. And in today's world of constricted resources, we really don't want to be competing, trying to convince legislators to take the dollar out of our next door neighbor's pocket. It's far more effective to bring our next door neighbor along with us and make common cause with them and the people we serve. And we do that through networks of populations, our senior networks, disability groups, vulnerable population groups. How do we bring people together as advocates? And Hillel's final line is, if not now, when? And I say to you, particularly with a legislative session coming up this February, with COVID-19, the future really is now. And so this is the time to mobilize. This is the time to begin to think about our stance on advocacy and who our friends will be, particularly after the election. So there are three kinds of people: those who make it happen, those who watch it happen, and those who wonder what the heck happened. I suggest to you that we need to be those who make it happen. There is really no room in the universe in which we're operating to be bystanders, and certainly not to have to be constantly in the mode of figuring things out. We need to be engaged. You don't get what you don't ask for. And one thing legislators will always, if they're honest with you, will tell you when you visit with them is, tell me what you want. I mean, why are you here? Don't turn it into a rambling social call. Don't turn it into a broad canvas of the universe. Come to them with a problem and ask to solve it. So many legislators are unfamiliar with respite issues, senior issues, disability issues. We're going to see a change in legislative committee assignments as we go into the session. And as we're in the interim now, so all those committees after the election will be reformed. There may be new leadership. And the session presents opportunities to address our issues. And we need to establish a framework to do that in. Now, we'll talk in a minute about some examples of how to do that. But it's really important to put a face on the issues. And I come back to the issue of engagement, getting our community mobilized, our boards and institutions mobilized so that we pull together. And there are great opportunities for synergy. So I'm going to throw out one example, for instance, for those of you who know Nevadans for the Common Good. They have been a longstanding now grassroots organization that brings together mostly faith-based and some community not-for-profits, usually around a set of issues as they move into the session. And they've been strong advocates back when for sexual trafficking legislation, for senior legislation, for Meals on Wheels. So they will take 2-3 issues that kind of bubble up grassroots. Right now they're focused on housing and education, for instance. And there are a number of groups like that around the state. So how do we engage with them? How do they engage with us? How do we bring that sense of community engagement together? And then how do we craft communications that can come both individually from us, from our agencies and our communities to legislators? And then how do we maintain those communications? Really important. We'll talk about that in a little more detail in a second. But engagement, engaging, and always have a call to action for the legislator. So what are things that to keep in mind as we actually try to put a face on our issues? First of all, coming into the legislative experience, now is a great time to start thinking about hosting events for legislators. You can do it virtually. We've had a number of meetings recently that have been really nice small group virtual sessions. Tell them a little bit about your agency, tell them a client story, introduce a client to them, discuss how important the services are to your clients. And then, for instance, in the case of elder issues, share the latest edition of Elder Issues in Nevada and the information kit that's available, because that's got our 7 or 8 or 9 top issues from the perspective of the Commission on Aging. And it's an opportunity to kind of hammer that home. And we'll have a new Elder Issues edition for this coming session. We've had one now for the last 4 sessions. When you go to visit or speak with your legislator, have an ask, really specific. I need you to vote for this. I need you to sponsor legislation that does this. And then, having put that ask on the table, ask the legislator how you can best follow up with them to support them as they address the ask. Now, if they poo-poo you, no time to give up. Time to press home. Find out what their objections are, circle back to the ask, figure out what they can do, figure out where the alliances are, and then, again, back to the follow-up question. So there are lots of partnerships for potential advocacy. Commission on Aging is one, the Legislative Subcommittee is another. The Division of Aging, other network services providers, AARP Nevada, Alzheimer's Association, we all have, those are all examples of communities of interest. And we don't have to agree with each other on every issue. We just need to find the commonality that we can partner and advocate for together. So there might be 8 issues in our bucket for respite, and AARP Nevada shares 3 of them. They share them nationally, and they share them in Nevada. So we focus on that part of the relationship. The Alzheimer's Association focuses on its 3 or 4, and we can share those issues. Now, some of these partnerships for advocacy, like ADSD, are groups that have implicit reasons to be advocates because they are all about the populations they serve. And so we shouldn't turn our nose up at the idea of, well, they're not a private group, they're a government group. They're one of our most important advocates statewide for both disability and aging issues. And communication on a policy level is really important. And again, the Commission on Aging is one way to do that. So when you start to look at how you're going to work with your legislators coming in and engaging with them, I kind of like this little model. Reach out. Is the program serving that you're advocating for one of their priority populations? And what is the need in their community? Do you know how many seniors there are or how many disabled kids there are in that particular legislator's community? Well, you can get a lot of that information right off the Secretary of State's website. How many voters are in their community that legislator needs to be concerned about to have their support? And how can you frame your issue to say, gee, 47% of the voters in your community are over 60 or have children with a variety of issues. Effectiveness. How important is the thing you're advocating for from an effectiveness perspective Can you show that it has an impact? What's the quality of it? What's the capacity of it? What does it impact? Does it impact nursing home placements, hospitals readmissions, the support caregivers? What does the program do, and what impact does it have, so the legislator can say a dollar spent here has a benefit and I'm willing to get behind it? Adoption. Are the service providers in the community themselves fully engaged? Are consumers involved in creating and using plans, person-centered care? All that is meaningful to the legislator to understand how it integrates into their communities and then to their constituency. Is the program being delivered the way it should be? The last thing you want to advocate for is something that's going to show on the front page of the newspaper as an ineffective or corrupt program. So let's make sure that when we're advocating for things that are strong, consistent, and where we can show not only effect, but that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing the way it's supposed to be doing. And lastly, and legislators are really concerned about this issue in today's world of tight dollars, can the program be sustained? Does its impact last? I'll use the COVID thing. One of the things that nobody knows about right now is how long immunities will last. And once we get to a vaccine, that'll be one of the concerns. Does it last 3 months, 6 months, a year, forever? And the same thing is true with programmatic benefits. If you can decrease the pressure on a family caregiver and reduce their desire to institutionalize their loved one, how long does that last? Does it last 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months? Is it forever? And how impactful is that? Because that's where person, result, and dollars all meet up. So as we kind of get ready for the session, what things can we do to get organized? Well, for those of you in agencies, make sure your board is on board, especially if you have community boards. You have bankers, you have lawyers, you have accountants, you have other community agency people. Bring your issues to your board, educate them, make the case, and then don't just ask for their vote, ask them for their active involvement. Let them use their networks and their connectivity. How you can engage with them will also make them stronger board members for you, because they will feel like they're participating and effective. You can organize them for advocacy. Look at specific tasks and that they can accomplish given their personal capabilities or connections. You can also hold issue-specific community events. And Nevada Senior Services, we've done this over the years. Target something narrow, not just respite, but some aspect of respite. Bring a community together, have a meeting, have 20, 30 folks together virtually, have the conversation, and have an outcome. And then use that to invite your legislators to participate and be part of crafting that and supporting that outcome. Nothing is better than when they can sign on themselves to a piece of legislation that you involve them with early on. I'll tell you Dina Titus' story. Some years ago, we have had a family caregiver who Dina knew from another life, another activity. And a couple of years ago, she came over to celebrate the anniversary of Social Security, and she brought a cake and her team over to one of our adult daycare centers. And as she walked through the door, she saw this family caregiver who she remembered by name and remembered this family caregiver story. So it was a retired military person, in fact. And every time I speak with Congresswoman Titus, she asks me about that family caregiver. She knows that story. She connects it to the legislation she's working on. So when we ask her to sign on to something, she's got that picture in her mind. So really important. Educate and engage your clients, make them part of what you do. Communications, ongoing. Letter writing is really helpful. Emails, telephone calls, follow-up client stories. Make it personal, make it frequent. If you don't think that legislators, whether they're assemblymen or state senators, whether they're congresspeople or federal senators, don't respond to volumes of calls. Let me tell you that they absolutely do. They count every one of them in the direction they're going, and when they see a big push, it motivates them. So think about how you can motivate your base, your clients, your staff, your friends, your board, everyone you know. When there is something that you want to push, piece of legislation, get them to write the letter, get them to send an email, make the telephone call, provide a link to websites that will push out standardized responses. Even though it's not as effective as a personal interaction, it still fills their inbox. So we talked a little bit. This was previous elder issues in Nevada. You can see the 2015 cover and the 2019 cover. And you can see that some of the issue areas, if you look at the 2019, were access to services, living alone with dementia, legal rights, caregiving, respite care, and affordable housing for seniors. And behind each of this was a policy advocacy statement that we then took through the commission and then used when we had Senior Issues Day to start a march towards educating our legislators. And remember, legislators are not necessarily knowledgeable about your issue. So you do have to bring them along. Now, longer standing legislators may have more depth on it if they have an interest in an area, but new ones may have zero. So this is your opportunity. Engage in the legislative process, educate your clients, get them involved, be willing to submit testimony in writing if you're squeamish about appearing, but appear if you at all can. Appear in public comment. Get scheduled as a subject matter expert to tell your story, and be there in person. I will tell you, legislators, and I know Barry, for instance, Gold is on this call. Barry and I have been at these sessions where the room has been so full, they've had to expand into a second room. And if you don't think that makes an impact on the legislators, let me tell you, it makes an overwhelming impact, and they remember it. And they carry that issue and that topic all session long because they remember that crowd. So just to kind of wrap up, issue-specific communications, always have an ask. Be brief, be personal, and stick to the issue when you're with them. Don't waste their time. Make sure you have a grasp of what the issue is, what your position is, and what exactly you want to happen. Make sure you're able to discuss with the legislator why you support it, why it is important, to what part of his constituency it's important, and why it'll work. Always follow up with them. Thank them for their response. Thank them for everything they do of a positive nature. If they vote for something that you've been pushing, don't just ignore it. Make sure you get back there and say thank you. And make sure you understand reasons for negative reactions. So the future is now. Elder Issues Day at the legislature and other events are opportunities. Follow the issues. Get on the state website and watch what the legislature is doing. Communicate with your assemblyman. Make sure they know who you are. They are local to you. Make sure they know you. Communicate with them often. Attend hearings and make public comment, whether it be in Carson City or in the Grant Sawyer building, and these days online, virtually. So we know COVID is going to color the session and will be the big cloud over the whole thing. We don't know what this year's hot topics will be. It's usually waiver slots is usually on there because we don't have enough resources to cover our community. Medicaid is always on the burner. Behavioral and cognitive health, our underpaid providers, neglect and abuse. Transportation has been a frequent sleeper issue, and it's one that we have not dealt with effectively this year. Housing, I guarantee you, is going to be a big issue, and nutrition, particularly because of the COVID-19 situation and how we've had to respond to it as a state. So a couple of parting thoughts. Opportunity for you is either nowhere or now here. And I suggest you elect for it to be now here and you get on board with advocacy. And Master Yoda, my favorite management scientist, says, try not, either do or do not. So if you're going to do this, get in with both feet and make it happen. Lastly, the opportunity for advocacy brings with it the echoes of the ancient Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. I suggest to you that through proper planning on your part, your agency's part, with your friends and colleagues, if you take a courageous and open attitude towards a willingness to engage with your legislators, if you maintain the will to succeed, can do, we can create a better life and a better future for us all, and we can place respite right in the center of this year's legislative session. So thank you very much. And I'd be happy to interact with you as we move forward into the legislative season in any way.
Thanks so much, Jeff. That was a lot of information and a lot very quickly. Is it possible that we can have a copy of your slides?
Absolutely. I'll convert it to PDF so it's easy to get hold of and ship one to you. And I'll also put one up on our website. So either way, you'll be able to distribute it or access it.
Okay, thanks so much. If any of you have specific questions for Mr. Klein, can you put them in the chat? I've kind of been looking and I didn't see anything recently, but you know, someone said here that funding for mental health also needs to be considered, which we know. And then the main question is, when is the booklet going to be done for this upcoming session?
So typically, what will happen is between now and November, the Legislative Subcommittee and the Commission on Aging will engage on this, and sometime after, right around the election or right after the election, depending on when the Commission on Aging gives it a blessing, it'll become available and we'll start using it.
But you have already started writing and you have committees and you're outlining things and okay. So,
yep. And you have at least two of our committee members with you today, Barry and Diane Ross,
right.
Barry Golden, Diane Ross.
Right. So you're thinking sometime after the election?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And is there any kind of list that we can get on for assisting with this information other than what?
Absolutely. I will set up, I'll send you a set of links to listservs and, for instance, for the Commission on Aging and for some of the other key legislative committees, and I'll send that over and you can put it up for everybody to be able to access.
Okay, thank you so much. We appreciate you taking the time out and we'll look forward to seeing what we can do to help.